How do I speak up in meetings without having to interrupt others? This is an Ask Me Anything question I received from a veteran woman engineer who wants to advance to the C-suite. She asked this. One of my biggest challenges I have as a veteran engineer with 30 years of experience is how to move to the next level of technical leader. I find the advice and stories that most provide would require me to go back in time and join a fraternity at MIT or similar impossible to replicate activity. I want to know how to present my subject matter expertise in a way that gains trust and make sure that I am able to communicate effectively in meetings. I'll never get to the C-suite if the only way I can get there is literally by interrupting other people. The depth of this question means that we answered it in multiple videos. And so the first one we talked about was how do I advance to the C-suite, where I gave an overview of my She Leads STEM Catalyst method and the 3 legs of the stool: competence, visibility, and trust that you need to advance to the highest levels within your organization. In episode 2 in this Ask Me Anything series, we talked about how do I present my expertise to gain trust, which was the second part of this question. And then in the third part, we talked about how do I communicate strategically in meetings. Today's video is going to answer the fourth and final piece of this question. So on the outside, this question is simply about how do I speak up effectively? But on the inside, you and I know, like, you've had points in your life, in your career, where you wanted to speak up, but you didn't. And one of the things that stops us from speaking up at work is what I call the good girl trap. From childhood, I was taught to do things like wait your turn, raise your hand, ask for permission. If you think about that elementary school classroom where you raised your hand before and waited to be called on before you could speak, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You were taught to be respectful and that it was rude to interrupt other people when they were speaking. And this kind of conditioning runs really deep when you have been rewarded for almost your entire life for not rocking the boat, for waiting to be called on to speak, for maybe not speaking until somebody asked you for your opinion. It can be really, really hard to break that communication pattern. And so, if you are struggling with this, I want you to know that you are not alone. It's something that I have personally struggled with myself. And so I want to note that there is a cost to this good girl trap for not breaking the pattern for not only yourself, but for the next generation of women in STEM coming up behind you. Because every time that you don't contribute your expertise in a meeting, when you want to say something and you don't, you are normalizing the idea that you and women like you don't speak up in meetings. And so the opportunity isn't just for yourself and your ability to advance within your organization. If you have younger folks in your meeting, especially if they are young women, they are watching you and looking to you as a role model to see, okay, how should I be behaving in these meetings? And so when you speak up, it normalizes it for everyone, especially for other women like you. When you claim your power in a professional space, you are modeling this for every woman watching. And so, like, for me, I have 3 daughters, 2 currently in high school, 1 who's in middle school. And I often think to myself, if they were sitting in this meeting with me, what behavior would I be modeling that I want them to model? And what I find is that when you speak up, there's this like butterfly effect down the chain of someone will say, oh, I saw them speak up in a meeting, and when they were questioned, here's what they did, here's how they showed up professionally. I can model that as well. Speaking up within the professional space is all about claiming your professional power. And when you do that, you, by your actions, help to dismantle the systems within our workplaces, within society, that tell us that it's not okay for women to be claiming that professional power. And so let's get into some tactical things here about how do you actually do that. You're going to use a strategic bridge to make sure you can get a word into this conversation. And so there are 3 pieces of this. The first is use your body language to show that you want to speak. I want to talk specifically about this in virtual meetings first. You can see in the example up on the screen that this is a meeting where most people have their cameras off and there are 2 people with their cameras on. When it comes to body language, it is much easier to get a word in and to signal to everyone else on the call that you want to speak if your camera is on. And I've personally found this one effective, even if I want to have my camera off most of the time. If I have it off and then I turn it on, and especially if I raise my physical hand, people immediately know that I want to speak. I've actually found that to be more effective than raising a virtual Teams or Zoom hand, in large part because that hand is really, really tiny. And if someone is a talker, if they got going on what they were talking about, they may not be looking at the screen. If your team is one where you actually look at who has the hand raised and goes in a reasonable order, you may not have to worry about this. Now, if you are in an in-person meeting, this is much easier. People look around to see who wants to talk next. Like you're not only counting on your words, they're looking at your body language. If you have the body language, if you can use your body language to show you want to speak, what else do you do next? You want to wait for a natural pause. Now, when I say natural pause, I'm not talking about the awkward silence where no one talks. I'm waiting for someone to take a breath and then you can jump in. And so this piece of it may be the most difficult for most of us who were trained to let everyone finish their thought before jumping in. And I would say, if this is a chronic issue for you, that you are in meetings where there are talkers who kind of take over the whole meeting, you've got to get into the habit of making your voice heard. And so when you jump in, what do? I want to give you a specific type of phrase called a yes and bridging phrase to make your point. Now, what you're going to do with this is you're actually going to connect to the person who is just talking, and then you're going to add your point. And we do that using a tool called yes and. So yes and comes from the world of improv, and it allows you to assert yourself without alienating others and not feeling like you are interrupting what they're saying. The mistake many STEM professionals make when they jump into a conversation is they hear something, they disagree with it, so they will jump in and say, I don't agree with it, and here's why. Or they'll say, great idea, but, and then they'll add the rest of what they say. When you do that, yes, but thing, that shuts down the conversation. It actually feels combative because everything before the but indicates to the person you're talking to that you are discounting everything they said before you got to the but. Another example I can give is if someone's ever said to you, I don't mean this to be offensive, but you know every word after that but is going to be offensive. And so if you use yes and instead, it builds the conversation. It feels collaborative. And so that sounds like, yes, I understand you prefer an aggressive timeline and will need to consider quality implications. Note how much less combative that sounds and how it continues the conversation. It also feels much, much less like an interruption if you feel like I can't get a word in edgewise, because to do that, I'd have to literally interrupt people. I'm going to share some examples in a moment, but before I do, I wanted to share that we have a very detailed blog just on how to use yes and in many contexts beyond the ones I'm going to share with you today. You can check that out on our website, and I'll drop that link in with this video description. With that, let's get into some meeting examples and how you might be able to use yes and in your meetings. First example is using it to jump into the conversation. So saying something like, I really like, share a specific part of their idea. So the person that just talked shares a specific part of their idea you like. And what if we also considered, and here you would add your insight. Another example, that timeline approach makes sense, and I'm thinking about the resource implications. The yes and tool can be really, really effective when you disagree with what's going on. You can point out, here's the piece that you liked about what they said, and I'm wondering if we're also considering this. You can say something like, I appreciate that perspective, and here's another angle I've been thinking about, and add your insight there. Now, you can also use this to redirect the conversation. Have you ever been in a conversation where you want to jump in and interrupt the conversation, mostly because it's gone way off tangent of what you were there for? I think all of us have had that experience. So here you can use the same tactic to say something like, these are all great points, and I'd like to take a step back for a moment and clarify what's our success criteria for this effort. Or you could say, I like where this is heading, and before we continue, help me understand, what are we solving for here? All of these yes and bridging phrases. Notice that yes, you're jumping in, but you're not steamrolling and taking over the conversation. And so the impact of this is the person that was talking took a breath and you jumped in. It doesn't as much feel to them that you interrupted, so much as that you are interested in what they were talking about and you are building on their idea. This really works for breaking that good girl trap I was talking about earlier, because you are literally empowering the person who just spoke while adding your expertise. And at the same time, you're also claiming your own space. You are claiming your professional power and demonstrating leadership. Now, I'm going to give you a couple more scenarios, but I want to talk about some of the other good girl trap symptoms first and what not to do. And I will say that everything I'm about to share with you, I have personally done at some point in time. So if any of these resonate with you, know you are not alone. And all it takes is some practice to refocus on that yes and strategic bridge and get away from the types of languaging and the ways you might be showing up that undermine your professional authority and competence. So the first one that we don't want to do is ask permission to speak. This kind of languaging sounds like this. Can I share something? May I add another perspective? Can I finish the thought I started before being interrupted? Let's say you were interrupted in speaking. That's when I have heard this one come out. Other things we don't want to do. Apologize for speaking or interrupting someone, where we might say, sorry for interrupting, but. Another thing not to do is overthink what you'll say and as a result, rarely speak up. The analogy I want to give you here is this is like playing a sport. So I used to play basketball. I'm going to go with a basketball analogy. And if you played an entire game of basketball and you waited until you had the perfect shot where there were no defenders in the way, it was the perfect place, you were guaranteed it was going to go in, literally that time would never go. Speaking up is like playing basketball in that it gets easier the more reps you put in. You need that muscle memory. So if you find yourself that you're overthinking what you'll say often, and as a result, you're not speaking up, one of the tactics you can use here is have a couple go-to questions you might ask. You can go back to video 3 in this series to find some more questions that will position you as a strategic mind within your team if you're struggling here. But again, the point with this avoiding the good girl trap is to get in the habit of speaking up. Finally, we don't want to take the interruption personally. I am the oldest of 8 children. And so for me, I'm actually, if anything, more in the habit of interrupting people than not. Because when you are sitting around a dinner table and there are my 7 siblings and 2 parents, and you want to get in a word edgewise, you just have to start speaking. And you just get used to, okay, it's not rude. It's just there's a lot of people here. Everybody wants to get their word in. And so when someone takes a breath, you jump in. So let me give you 3 more examples of this, where we compare and contrast what the good girl internal dialogue may be saying in your head and how you might speak up using this yes and bridge instead. So first example, let's say you had a project timeline discussion. The good girl internal dialogue that may be going on in your head would say something like this. I'll wait for someone to ask my opinion, which incidentally never seems to happen on my particular team. They must not value my opinion since they don't ask for it. It's not polite to interrupt people, so I won't share my insights. What can you do instead? Speak up using a yes and bridge. Someone takes a breath in the conversation and you jump in with, I'm hearing an aggressive timeline is a priority and I have concerns about quality implications. And remember, don't grab this particular one verbatim. The scenario I'm talking about here is you're having a project timeline discussion. So you want to use yes and as appropriate to the specific conversation that you are having. Let's take a second scenario. Let's say you are in a meeting that seems to be dominated by one person. You got a talker who's talking all the time. And so let's say it's a virtual meeting and the thoughts going through your head are something like, I've been sitting with my team's hand up for the last 10 minutes with a question and they haven't called on me yet. I might as well put my hand down since I'm not sure my question is even relevant at this point. So what I want you to do instead is just catch yourself when you think that, because again, I've thought similar things myself. Catch yourself and be like, oh, there's the good girl thing again. How do I claim my professional space in this moment? So what you could do is speak up, turn on that camera if it's virtual, and say something like, I appreciate what you've shared so far, and I have a clarifying question before we go further. Then you ask that question. Now, after you ask that question, you also say, this also raises an important point about topic, whatever you want to talk about with this, that I will share after you answer my question. So this kind of response does two things. It gets you into the conversation because you asked a clarifying question, and you are seeding the fact that after they answer your question, you have an insight that you want to share. So it's likely that either they'll ask you directly after they answer your question, or someone else in the group will come back to you and say, hey, you said you had something you wanted to share. What is that thing? I'll give you a third scenario, and this is another super common one. The meeting is hijacked by a tangential discussion. So you had your meeting agenda, and one of the agenda items just goes really off the rails. And the approach I'm about to share with you works well both if you are running the meeting where the agenda goes off the rails, or if you are in the meeting, but you're not running the meeting. I've used it in both situations, and it's worked really, really well. So the good girl dialogue will say, I'll just be quiet and hope someone else will redirect the conversation. Why are they getting off track? This meeting is a waste of my time. That might be some of the things, the inner voice is talking to you with this good girl internal dialogue. Instead, what you can do is speak up using this yes and bridge. If it's a virtual meeting, you could raise both virtual hands. Remember, I said earlier, most people will see this, and that's a signal for stop. I will also use timeout on virtual calls. And so you can do that so they can see your body language that you are planning to speak. And I will do that, and then I will jump in. So I want to be super clear on this one. So raising your hand and then just sitting there with your hand up, waiting for permission for, I would say, more than 5 seconds at most, right? That is where we start falling into this, oh, she's waiting to be called up. If you instead use body language to kind of raise your hand and then at the next available breath, jump in, you have changed the narrative, because what you just did is you signaled to the group that you want to speak, and then you just started speaking. And so that's not a permission-based thing. And so hopefully you see the differences between those two. Okay, so in this case, you might say something like, hold up a second. It sounds like there are other items that need to be addressed. And before we dive deeper, let's clarify what we're solving for in this meeting. What is our goal with this meeting today? I think it's this. You could share what that is. Do you agree? And then what I find is that when you ask this particular question, the conversation immediately writes to get back on track. And I've even said things like, okay, this is a really important discussion. Let's table this for a future meeting. We'll put that as a future agenda item. Let's get back to the thing we need to solve for today, which is this. And again, what I just shared is very effective if you are running the meeting. I would stick with the type of question that you see up on the screen if you are a participant in that meeting. So I hope you heard the difference in the 3 scenarios I just shared between falling into the good girl trap and using the yes and strategic bridge to claim your professional power. Now, like with every skill in the world, including my basketball analogy from earlier, you have to take action on what you learned. And so what I want you to do is practice using the yes and as a strategic bridge. The yes and tool is one of the ones I use all the time. Every day, in every single meeting, I will say something to the effect of, I heard, whatever I heard, and then I will add what I want to add. And so I've given you a lot of examples. I want you to practice this because I really and truly believe it will change how you are able to demonstrate your leadership presence, your leadership skills in your meetings, no matter what level you are at in your career. This is just as applicable to a super early career person as it is to someone wanting to get to the C-suite. So today, I've been very specifically talking about the answer to the question that I was asked about, I'm trying to get to the C-suite. The only way I can talk is if I interrupt other people. How do I get a word in? So once you start talking, sometimes then you will get interrupted. And so if that is the problem you are facing, it's like the next step here. I want you to go check out a blog, a very detailed blog I wrote that talks about how to stop getting interrupted in meetings and also goes into examples and tactics that you can grab and use in that situation. So this concludes the answer to this question. Today's video only covered the last piece you can see in yellow here about speaking up. And if you missed the other 3 videos in this series that covered the earlier parts of this question, you will see the links to them in the video description. In my next video, I'm going to address a question from our community on how much to push junior staff to improve. If you are a manager or are directing the work of others in any way, you aren't going to want to miss this. If you are interested in this topic, I also encourage you to subscribe to this channel so you'll be notified when that next video is available.